The Mercy Killer. The Little Rock Cold Case Unit office was busy, but the energy was good. Jenny was reviewing the notes from their camping trip, Liam having sent her a picture of Finn covered in mud. Ben was finishing up a call with his contractor, sounding slightly less stressed about the renovations. The new file, transferred from the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office, was titled The Silent Needle. It detailed a cold case from 2008 involving the unusual death of Brenda Chavez, a 34-year-old woman found deceased in her home. The original case, Brenda Chavez. Brenda Chavez's death was originally ruled inconclusive. At the scene, Brenda was found on her sofa. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. Her husband, Victor Chavez, a man with a documented history of domestic violence, had called it in, claiming he found her unresponsive. Cause of death: the autopsy found no conventional cause of death. However, the toxicological screening showed a trace amount of a barbiturate, specifically sodium pentobarbital, in her bloodstream. This drug is commonly used by veterinarians for animal euthanasia. The problem: the quantity was too small to be a lethal dose on its own, leading the medical examiner to rule the death inconclusive, attributing it possibly to a severe, undetected cardiac event that was masked by the low trace of the drug. The case stalled. Victor Chavez, the prime suspect due to the domestic violence history, was never charged due to lack of cause of death and lack of evidence connecting him to the drug. The New Angle, the cold case unit, received the file after a similar subsequent case from a neighboring county involving a man named Gary Vance, also a known domestic abuser who died in 2010 with the same microscopic trace of pentobarbital. The unconventional theory. Jenny immediately seized on the pattern. 2 victims, both linked to severe domestic abuse, both died with the same tiny, non-lethal trace of an animal euthanasia drug. It's not about the lethal dose, Ben, Jenny stated, spreading out the files. It's about the delivery system. The killer is using the drug to mask the true cause of death or as part of a ritual. The small dose is the killer's signature. Ben looked up from the autopsy report, Echo resting his chin on the paper. A professional signature. Only someone with access to scheduled veterinary drugs would use pentobarbital, and someone who knows how to administer it cleanly. Exactly, Jenny confirmed. We're looking for a person in the veterinary field, a vet tech, or a veterinary supplier, and they are targeting people who abuse their partners. Jenny felt a grim sense of purpose. This wasn't a random serial killer. This was someone enacting their own form of twisted justice, eliminating abusers whom the system had failed to stop. The veterinary connection. Jenny immediately contacted Liam, the most trusted source in the veterinary community, under strict confidence. I need a complete list of licensed veterinary professionals who had access to pentobarbital and lived or worked in the areas near Brenda Chavez and Gary Vance, Jenny told him. Liam, ever cautious, provided the information but warned her about the difficulty. Pentobarbital is highly regulated, Jenny, but access for euthanasia is common. The list will be long. You need to narrow the field. Jenny and Ben narrowed the search to veterinary technicians who worked at small private clinics where inventory logs might be less scrutinized than large hospitals. They cross-referenced addresses and clinic locations with the victims. They found one name that stood out: Cassie Lane. AE's Cassidy Lane worked as a vet tech at a clinic that was roughly equidistant from both Brenda Chavez's home and Gary Vance's home. Her file noted a history of excellent performance, but also a deeply empathetic. almost overly protective attitude toward abused animals. Crucially, Cassidy Lane's younger sister, Jessica, was a client at the same women's shelter Brenda Chavez volunteered at shortly before her death. She has the access, the geographical link, and a strong emotional motive connected to the victim's world, Ginny concluded. She's not killing the victims, she's eliminating the abusers, using the tools of her trade to execute what she sees as a necessary act of mercy. Ginny knew that a mercy killer operating in the shadows would leave a paper trail, however faint. The inventory logs for controlled substances like pentobarbital would be the most direct link to their suspect, Cassidy Lane. The discrepancy in the logs, Ginny and Ben, accompanied by a representative from the state's veterinary medical board, obtained a warrant to audit the pentobarbital inventory logs from the clinics where Cassidy Lane had worked between 2008 and 2010. The audit was tedious, involving cross-referencing patient records, euthanasia certificates, and drug purchase receipts. Initially, everything seemed to match. However, Ben, with his meticulous eye for detail, noticed a pattern of subtle, recurring discrepancies at Cassidy's first clinic, EA small missing doses. Every few months, there would be a record of a slightly larger waste disposal than usual for pentobarbital, or a tiny unlogged fractional dose that didn't correspond to any patient's weight or procedure. These amounts were too small to be lethal to a human, but collectively added up. The erroneous log entries. On at least 3 separate occasions between 2008 and 2010, Cassidy had signed off on erroneous log entries for pentobarbital, correcting them later with a note like spill or a recalculation. The original, uncorrected entry always showed a slightly higher amount than what was officially accounted for. She wasn't stealing large amounts, Ginny, Ben observed, pointing to the patterns. She was siphoning off tiny, almost imperceptible fractions. Enough for a trace, not a full dose. She knew exactly what she was doing, taking just enough to leave her signature, not enough to kill, but enough to confuse an ME. The logs strongly suggested that Cassidy Lane had been systematically acquiring small amounts of pentobarbital for years, using her knowledge of the clinic's inventory system to mask the theft. She had the means to obtain the drug, and the logs provided circumstantial evidence of her access to it around the time of the deaths. Jessica's trauma. Next, Ginny and Ben tracked down Jessica Lane, Cassidy's younger sister. Jessica was working as a counselor at a local women's shelter, ironically the same shelter where Brenda Chavez had volunteered years prior. Jessica was initially wary, her demeanor reflecting years of quiet resilience in the face of trauma. Ginny gently explained they were investigating a cold case and that her sister Cassidy had come up in their inquiries. Cassidy? Jessica frowned, a flicker of protectiveness in her eyes. She wouldn't hurt a fly, unless it was a fly hurting an animal. Ginny explained their theory about the targeted abusers and the trace of pentobarbital. Jessica's face went white. Trace, Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. Not a full dose, just a trace? Jessica then revealed the profound traumatic event that had shaped both her and Cassidy's lives. With their mother's death, our mother, Jessica began, tears welling in her eyes. She was in a terribly abusive relationship after our dad passed. Her partner, he was a monster. He beat her for years. We begged her to leave, but she couldn't. She was terrified. The unsolved mystery. One morning, Jessica continued, her voice trembling, we found her. Just like Brenda Chavez. No signs of struggle, no obvious cause. They called it natural causes. But Cassidy always believed he killed her. She saw the fear in our mother's eyes, the way she withered. She knew, Cassidy's promise. Jessica looked at Jenny, her gaze haunted. Cassidy was devastated. She swore that no one else would suffer like Mom did. She said if the law couldn't protect them, someone else would have to. Jessica also confirmed the connection to Brenda Chavez. Brenda volunteered here for a while, a few years before she died. She was helping other women escape abusive situations. Cassidy knew her through me. They sometimes talked when Cassidy came to visit. Brenda often spoke about her fears regarding her own husband, Victor. The interview with Jessica provided the missing piece, a powerful, deeply personal motive rooted in profound childhood trauma and a vow of twisted justice. Cassidy Lane wasn't just a vet tech, she was the mercy killer, using her unique access to exact revenge on abusers she believed were escaping justice. Jenny knew confronting Cassidy Lane prematurely would allow her to destroy evidence or solidify an alibi. The methodical approach of surveillance, followed by a detailed forensic review, would build an unassailable case. Surveillance, the predator's routine. Jenny and Ben, working closely with the sheriff's office, initiated discreet surveillance on Cassidy Lane. They wanted to observe her routine, her interactions, and any signs that she was actively seeking new targets. For several days, Cassidy's life appeared mundane. She went to work at her veterinary clinic, performed her duties meticulously, and spent her evenings quietly at home. Finn and Echo, rotating with other K-9 units, played a crucial role. Often positioned in nearby vehicles, their heightened senses alert for anything unusual. However, the pattern began to emerge in the evenings. EA, online activity. Jenny's team uncovered Cassidy's anonymous online activity. She frequented obscure online forums and chat groups dedicated to survivors of domestic violence, often posting under pseudonyms and expressing extreme views about abusers. She engaged in lengthy, passionate arguments, advocating for ultimate justice for victims whom the system had failed. Late-night drives, 2 nights in a row. Cassidy took late-night drives. She didn't go to bars or social gatherings. Instead, she drove through specific, less affluent neighborhoods, often parking her car discreetly and observing houses from a distance for extended periods. The team cross-referenced these observations with local police reports on domestic disturbance calls. In at least one instance, a house Cassidy observed had a recent documented history of domestic violence. This surveillance confirmed Cassidy's active search for targets and her deeply ingrained belief system. She wasn't simply reacting to news, she was a predator, meticulously identifying her next victim based on her own warped sense of justice. Forensic review, the silent signature. Simultaneously, Jenny requested a full forensic re-examination of the original autopsy samples from Brenda Chavez and Gary Vance. She specifically asked the medical examiner to search for any microscopic evidence of a consistent delivery method for the pentobarbital. The results were chilling. DH microscopic injection sites in both victims, despite the original ME ruling out overt needle marks due to the absence of a large visible puncture wound. The new, more sophisticated forensic analysis found microscopic, almost invisible puncture marks in the inner thigh area of both victims. These marks were consistent with a fine-gauge veterinary needle, the kind used for delicate subcutaneous injections in small animals. E8 residual anesthetic, further analysis of the surrounding tissue around these micropuncture sites also revealed trace amounts of a local anesthetic mixed with the pentobarbital. This indicated the killer was not only precise, but also intended to make the injection as painless and imperceptible as possible. preventing the victim from feeling the initial needle stick. This was a hallmark of veterinary practice aimed at minimizing animal discomfort. The RE examination provided the undeniable how Cassidy wasn't relying on victims ingesting the drug. She was administering it directly, likely while they were asleep or otherwise incapacitated, using her veterinary skill to ensure clean, untraceable delivery that mimicked natural causes. The trace of pentobarbital was her chilling signature, just enough to mark her mercy, not enough to kill, leaving the real cause of death a mystery. Jenny now had overwhelming evidence. Cassidy Lane had the motive, the means, the opportunity, and the method. The final step was the confrontation. Jenny agreed. A deeper understanding of the victims' lives might reveal subtle connections or vulnerabilities Cassidy exploited, strengthening their interrogation strategy. Deep dive the victims' unseen vulnerabilities. Jenny and Ben meticulously re-examined the lives of Brenda Chavez and Gary Vance, focusing on the hours and days leading up to their deaths, looking for any routine, habit, or vulnerability Cassidy Lane might have exploited. Brenda Chavez. Key routine: Brenda was a creature of habit. She worked a demanding but predictable schedule, and after her husband Victor's violent outbursts, she often sought solace by staying up late watching old movies, often drifting to sleep on the sofa with the TV on. A vulnerability, a neighbor's statement, largely dismissed by the original investigators, mentioned that Brenda frequently left a small window in her kitchen ajar for her pet cat, Mittens, to come and go freely at night. Mittens was an indoor-outdoor cat, a sleep aid. Friends mentioned Brenda occasionally took over-the-counter sleep aids after particularly stressful arguments with Victor, but never anything stronger. Jenny's eyes lit up. The open window, that's how she got in. Brenda, seeking comfort, would fall asleep on the sofa, leaving an easy entry point. A cat going in and out would easily mask a quiet entry. Gary Vance. EA routine. Gary Vance, known for his volatile temper, had a peculiar habit. After a heavy drinking session, often following a confrontation with his partner, he would retreat to his study, lock the door, and pass out in his armchair, usually with a whiskey glass still in his hand. Vulnerability, his partner, during her police interview, mentioned that Gary often left the patio door to his study unlocked during these drunken retreats, believing the high fence around his property was sufficient security. Sedative link. A relative mentioned Gary was prescribed a mild sedative for anxiety, but he rarely took it. Ben connected the dots. Gary's drunken stupors and the unlocked patio door. Cassidy could have slipped in while he was unconscious. The sedative would make any trace of pentobarbital harder to detect, or the effect more subtle. The mercy and the modus operandi. The deep dive revealed Cassidy's chilling precision. She exploited existing vulnerabilities in their homes. She likely targeted them when they were most vulnerable, ensuring a silent, unresisted injection. Trace amount of pentobarbital combined with their pre-existing conditions or habits was designed to create an ambiguous cause of death, making it appear as if they simply succumbed to their own unhealthy lifestyles or an undetected medical issue, while the drugs subtly, painlessly stopped their hearts. The small needle marks would be overlooked, and the local anesthetic would prevent them from stirring. Jenny now understood the depth of Cassidy's twisted compassion. She wasn't a violent killer. She was a stealthy, precise executioner, delivering what she perceived as a painless, dignified euthanasia to those she deemed irreparable abusers. The meticulous planning reflected her veterinary training, applying her skill to end suffering, albeit in a horrifyingly misplaced way. Armed with this comprehensive understanding, Jenny and Ben felt ready to confront Cassidy Lane. They knew not just what she did, but how and why. Confronting Cassidy Lane, Jenny and Ben arranged for Cassidy Lane to come to the station for a follow-up interview regarding clinic protocols, not revealing the true nature of their investigation. Cassidy arrived, poised and professional, unaware of the trap closing around her. They began by reviewing the pentobarbital logs, and Jenny watched Cassidy's reactions closely as Ben pointed out the erroneous entries and fractional doses. Cassidy remained calm, offering plausible explanations for each discrepancy. Then Jenny shifted. Cassidy, we also found microscopic puncture marks consistent with a fine-gauge veterinary needle on both Brenda Chavez and Gary Vance, on their inner thighs, and traces of a local anesthetic around those sites. Cassidy's composure faltered. Her hands, resting on the table, began to tremble almost imperceptibly. Jenny continued, her voice firm but not accusatory. We know about your mother, Cassidy. We know her abuser was never brought to justice, and we know you swore no one else would suffer like she did. Your sister Jessica told us she believes you are a protector, Ben added. We also know about the open window at Brenda Chavez's house and the unlocked patio door at Gary Vance's. We know you looked for vulnerabilities. You gave them a mercy dose, didn't you, Cassidy? Just enough to stop a weakened heart, but too little to be considered lethal, making it look natural. You euthanized them, just like you would an animal in pain. Cassidy finally broke. The professional facade crumbled, revealing a woman consumed by grief and a desperate, misguided mission. Tears streamed down her face, but there was no remorse for her actions, only a profound, heartbreaking conviction. They deserved it, Cassidy whispered, her voice choked with emotion. They were monsters. The system protected them, not their victims. My mother, she died of a broken heart. I just helped theirs stop. She confessed to everything, calmly detailing how she accessed their homes, administered the small, silent doses, and watched as their lives painlessly slipped away. She truly believed she was a guardian angel, delivering peace to the tortured and justice to their tormentors. The silent needle had finally found its wielder. The aftermath, a justice divided. Cassidy Lane's confession was meticulously recorded. She recounted each step with a haunting calm, detailing her justification. These men, she believed, were irreparable threats, and her actions were a final humane solution to prevent further suffering, a euthanasia for the broken parts of humanity the law couldn't reach. The fine-gauge needles, the local anesthetic, the strategic timing, all confirmed her twisted sense of mercy. The arrest of Cassidy Lane, the mercy killer, sent a different kind of shockwave through Little Rock. Unlike the typical cold case where the killer is a monster, Cassidy's actions sparked a complex public debate. While no one condoned murder, the horrific domestic violence histories of her victims brought a strange, unsettling empathy from some corners of the community. Jessica Lane, Cassidy's sister, stood by her, devastated by her actions, but understanding the deep-seated pain that drove them, Jenny's internal conflict. For Jenny, a red-headed Irish woman who had always believed in the clear lines of justice, the case was deeply unsettling. She understood the rage, the heartbreak, the desperate desire to protect the vulnerable. She had seen the devastating impact of domestic violence firsthand in her career. Yet, Cassidy had crossed an unforgivable line, taking the law into her own hands, however merciful her intentions. It's a tough one, isn't it? Ben observed back at the office, Echo resting his head on his hand as he reviewed the case file. Some folks are already calling her a folk hero. Ginny ran a hand through her fiery red hair. Hero or not, she's a murderer, Ben. The law doesn't care about intent when you take a life. But I get it. I truly do. It's the kind of case that makes you question the failures that lead people to such extreme acts. She thought of her own strong sense of right and wrong, honed by her upbringing and her years on the force. Cassidy Lane was a testament to the raw, visceral pain that festered when justice seemed to fail. Liam's perspective. Later that evening, Ginny spoke to Liam, recounting the disturbing details of Cassidy's confession and her rationale. She called it mercy, Liam, Ginny said, her voice heavy. She said she was ending their pain, just like we would for a suffering animal. Liam, the veterinarian, listened intently. That's a terrifying distortion of the oath, Ginny. Euthanasia is about alleviating unavoidable suffering in a dying creature with consent and within strict ethical bounds. What she did, that's cold, calculated murder. There's no mercy in taking a human life, even if you believe it's for the greater good. I know, Ginny sighed, running a hand over Finn's head, who was looking up at her with concerned eyes. But seeing her sister, seeing the pain in her eyes as she described their mother, Liam wrapped an arm around her. You almost That's why your job is so vital, my love. Someone could break you're the one who chases the truth. No Liam wrapped an arm around her. Justice, real justice. That's why your job is so vital, my love. Even for those who thought they were serving it themselves, no matter how ugly, so justice, real justice can be served. Its ethical complexities. Even for those who thought they were serving it themselves, a stark reminder that the line between justice and vengeance, but its ethical complexities could be tragically for Ginny. A stark reminder that the line between justice and vengeance, protection and victory, could be tragically blurred when desperation took hold. It was a victory, but a somber one.